World of Warcraft. Tides of Darkness by Aaron Rosenberg. Chapter 11. "Keep them moving," Doomhammer bellowed, turning to look back at the horde marching behind him. "We need to get through these peaks quickly." "Why?" This was from Ren Blackhand. He and his brother Mame hated Doomhammer for killing their father and taking his place as war chief. They were among the few who dared to question Doomhammer's orders. Doomhammer allowed it, both because he knew any explanation he gave would filter back to the rest of the Horde, and because the Blacktooth Grin was a large, powerful clan and therefore useful. Besides, the brothers might question actions or decisions, but they never disobeyed a direct order, even when they disagreed with it. Doomhammer appreciated that, and was willing to tolerate their questions up to a point. "Why what?" Doomhammer answered now. He was negotiating the steep path up the mountain, and most of his attention was on the rocks beneath his hands and feet. The forest trolls had already passed them by, scaling the cliff as easy as they climbed the trees, and had lowered ropes to aid the orc warriors in their climb. But Doomhammer refused to use them. He needed his troops to know he was still the strongest of them, and climbing the mountain unaided was one way to accomplish that. Ren had no such computations, and was pacing Doomhammer with one of the stout ropes wrapped firmly around his left arm. "Why are we climbing?" Ren asked. "We could have gone around these mountains instead. Why are we taking this way? It is shorter, true, but harder. Scaling these peaks will slow us down." Doomhammer reached the top of the cliff and grunted, wiping his hand clean of rock dust by rubbing them against his upper arms. He turned to face Ren as the other chieftain joined him at the peak, his brother, and the other horde leaders right behind them. They know better than to reach the top before Doomhammer. "The humans think us stupid," Doomhammer began, making sure all of them could hear him. He did not like having to repeat himself. "They imagine us dumb brutes, just as we see the ogres." Several turned to look below, where the ogres were trailing behind even the orcs in their climb. They were strong enough to move past, but too clumsy to manage easily. I encourage that image," he grinned, showing his tusks, letting them think us brainless. It makes our conquest easier because they underestimate us." He stooped and picked up a small rock, tossing it from hand to hand as he spoke. "We already have fooled them once by splitting off a few clans when we reached the hinterlands," he pointed out. "They busied themselves battling that portion of the Horde, while we proceeded this way toward the mountains. And they will still be busy while we cross here." "But we're heading to Quel'Thalas, are we not?" Mame asked, the strange name causing him some difficulty. "Why not sail to as close to it as possible, then be there long before the humans emerge from the hinterlands?" "Because the elves will never let our ships pass unmolested," Doomhammer pointed out. "Zul'jin say they are expert archers, and we would be trapped on the ships while they rained arrows down upon us. We would lose thousands, whole clans, before we could even reach the shore to fight them." Several of the chieftains murmured. That had not occurred to them. The Horde was still not accustomed to the idea of using ships, though a few, like the Storm Reavers, had taken to it quickly enough. "But we have marched around the mountains. We could have marched around the mountains," Ren pointed out. "A longer route, but less difficult." Doomhammer sneered at that. "Are you afraid of a challenge, then?" Several of the other chieftains laughed, and Ren blustered. "Of course not," he snapped, raising one fist clearly ready to fight anyone who claimed otherwise. "I am up to the task. I was right behind you the entire time." No one dared point out that he had to use a rope, while Doomhammer had not. The Black Hands were fearsome warriors and widely respected. Another reason Doomhammer allowed them to ask so many questions. "Then you do wish to challenge?" Doomhammer asked quietly, his voice dropping. Ren backed away quickly, paling as he realized what he had almost said. The Black Hands wanted to lead the Horde, but they would have to challenge and defeat Doomhammer in combat to do so, and they all knew that he would kill them even if they both attacked at once. Part of him kept hoping they would try. Then he could replace them with more reasonable Blacktooth Grin chieftain, but so far they had always backed down. "Going round might have been faster," Doomhammer said, finally, when he saw Ren was not going to take the bait. "But our movements would have been more visible. This way, we come upon the elves with them unawares." He grinned again. "If the humans survive the battle in the hinterlands, can march around the mountains. They may reach Quel'Thalas before us. And then, if the elves allow them entry, they will all be gathered together when we attack." He laughed and crushed the rock in his hands, dust spraying everywhere from beneath his fingers. "They have nowhere to go from there. We will crush them and make that land our own." He opened his hand and let the dust and rocks chips fall away. "And if they are behind us, they will find us already established in Quel'Thalas when they arrive, and we will beat them back and smash them against the foothills behind them." He made a show of wiping his hands clean again. "Either way, we win." The others all murmured, several of them grinning and laughing as well, and Ren nodded. "You are wise," he grudgingly admitted. "This is a good plan." Doomhammer nodded to accept the compliment. "Now we must continue," Doomhammer told the rest of them. "There are still several peaks to cover." He turned to Zuluhead first, however. "Where are they?" he asked. "On the way," the Dragonmaw chieftain answered, grinning at the murmurs that rose behind him. None of the other orcs knew anything more than that the Dragonmaw were planning something with Doomhammer's full approval. "They have a long way to travel, but they are swift. They will reach us soon, and the world will tremble at their arrival." "Good." Then Doomhammer turned and glanced at the tall figure standing a short distance away, its long scarf blowing in the wind. "How far are we from Quel'Thalas?" 4 days' travel at this pace," Zul'jin replied. "But we could be there sooner." The forest troll's eyes gleamed at the prospect, and his hands strayed to the axe at his side. "No," Doomhammer ordered, ignoring the troll's obvious disappointment. "You will stay with us and continue lowering the ropes for the troops." He grinned at the troll leader. "Do not worry. You'll get your chance to attack the elven homeland, but not until the horde is right behind you, ready to roll down upon them." Zul'jin pondered this for a moment, then nodded. They be angry, he commented, then laughed. "They emerge like wasps ready to sting, and you be swarming them like ants devouring them whole." Yes, Doomhammer liked the image. Ants were industrious workers and sturdy beyond all expectation. They could be nasty as well, gathering to overwhelm much larger creatures. Yes, ants would do nicely, and right now he signaled the march to continue, the horde marching upon the mountain behind him like an army of ants intent upon conquest. Four days later, Doomhammer and his chieftains looked down from the foothill that stood between the last mountain peaks and the start of the great forest. The rest of the horde was massing behind them, weary from the climb and marching, but shaking off the fatigue, and now their next target lay before them. None were as excited as the forest trolls. "We be going now?" Zul'jin looked eagerly at Doomhammer, who nodded. "Yes, we go now," the war chief agreed. "Bring the fight to the elves. Spare no one and nothing." The forest troll leader grinned and tilted his head back to let loose a strangled warbling cry. Another forest troll appeared immediately just beyond where the two leaders stood, moving as silently and suddenly as a ghost. A third dropped from the rocks overhead to stand beside him, another beside that one, and more after them, until the small valley behind the hill was filled with the tall, lanky forest creatures. There were far more than Doomhammer remembered. Zul'jin bringing with him, and his surprise must have shown because the forest troll leader grinned through his ever-present scoff. "Found them more," he explained. "Witherbark tribe be joining us." Doomhammer nodded. was not particularly afraid of them, though the trolls were taller than him. He had faced bigger and stronger foes before, and always he had been the one to walk away. Besides, in the months since forging their alliance with Zul'jin had impressed him. The forest troll was a clever one, but he also had honor. He had promised his people's aid to the Horde and would not go back on that. Doomhammer was willing to risk his life on that belief. Of course, the fact that the forest trolls apparently hated these high elves certainly helped. The trolls had been all in favor of turning northward towards Quel'The the Lost, and had almost frantic to breach the elven forest and begin finding and attacking the elves themselves. Doomhammer insisted they wait, however. He wanted the rest of the Horde properly in position before the trolls struck, and Zul'jin had managed to keep his brethren in line, even though he was just as eager to strike as they were. But now, the time for waiting was over. With a howl, Zul'jin leapt forward and raced down the hills. He did not slow as he struck the edge of the forest, but jumping up into the trees, springing easily from limb to limb. The rest of his people followed him, bounding into the trees and disappearing from view, with only the rustle of leaves and the occasional growl to mark their presence. But Doomhammer knew they would make their way deep into the massive forest, seeking elves and killing any they found. Soon, the forest defenders would know about the trolls' invasion and would rush to meet them. And that would keep the elves busy. Too busy to check their borders for other threats. Doomhammer signaled, and the rest of the Horde swept over the hill as well, marching steadily across the narrow strip of grassland, and at last reaching the first row of trees. "Now, War Chief!" a nearby orc warrior asked, axe at the ready. Doomhammer nodded, and the warrior turned back to the tree beside him, its trunk thick from age and smooth as silk, its leaves rich and green, and the smell of nature and life and bounty. And with a mighty swing, the orc chipped a large splinter of bark and wood from its trunk. Then he swung again, expanding the chip. "No! No!" Doomhammer snatched the axe from the startled warrior, shoving him back. "Do not approach it at an angle, but straight on," he instructed. He pulled the axe back, bunching his muscles, and then swung with all his force, embedding the axe partway through the trunk. Then with a mighty wrench, he retrieved the weapon and struck again in the same spot, deepening the wound. A third blow saw the axe almost through the other side. Only a small portion of wood and bark remained. Doomhammer pulled his axe back, angling upwards as he did so. Its head pushed upwards on the trunk, and the tree tipped and fell, snapping that remaining section from its own weight and momentum. The ground shook as the tree hit, and leaves and berries flew everywhere. "There! Like that!" He tossed the axe back to the warrior, who nodded and moved to the next tree in line. A second warrior was already stepping up to the felled tree, axe in hand, ready to the task of chopping the great tree into smaller segments. Beyond him, more warriors were about the same task, carrying supplies for an army as large as the Horde. As large as the Horde was a hopeless task. So instead, they took what they needed from the lands they had conquered, and the wood from the trees would keep the Horde's fires burning for weeks, perhaps even months. The fact that every tree they cut down deprived the elves of additional protection only made the task sweeter. Doomhammer was leaning upon his hammer, watching the work progress, when he saw motion from the corner of his eye. A short, heavy-set orc with a bristling beard was heading toward him, scarred face twisted in an expression. Doomhammer wasn't sure he liked Gul'dan. Gul'dan was excited about something. "What is it?" Doomhammer demanded before the chief warlock had reached him. "Something you should see, mighty Doomhammer," Gul'dan replied, sweeping in a low bow. Cho'Gall chuckled and aped the gesture behind him. "Something that could aid the Horde greatly." Doomhammer nodded and swung his hammer up onto his shoulder, gesturing for Gul'dan to precede him. The warlock turned and led both Doomhammer and Cho'Gall back around, perhaps 100 feet from where he stood. Here stood a massive stone, forcing a gap in the trees. Its rough surface was carved with runes, and even Doomhammer, who had no gift at all for the supernatural or spiritual, could feel the power radiating off this crude monolith.
What is it? He demanded. I don't know exactly, Gul'dan answered, stroking his beard, but it is very powerful, I believe. These rune stones, for there are others spaced evenly around the forest's edge, serve as a mystic barrier. They did not stop us, Doomhammer pointed out. No, because we use nothing more than our own hands and feet and blades, Gul'dan replied. I believe these rune stones restrict the use of magic within, most likely allowing only the elves' own magic to function. I tried tapping my magics here, and I cannot. But if I move 10 paces away toward the hills, my spells return.
Doomhammer eyed the large hunk of stone with a new appreciation.
So we take them and set them around our enemies, and they cannot cast spells,
he mused, wondering how many orcs it would take to move the monoliths and how they would transport them.
That is one approach, yes,
Gul'dan agreed, his tone clearly saying what he thought of such an idea.
But I have another in mind, my war chief, if you will indulge me for a moment.
Doomhammer nodded. He did not trust Gul'dan, not at all, but the warlock had proven useful with the creation of the Death Knights. He was curious what the stocky orc had in mind now.
These stones contain immense powers,
Gul'dan explained.
I believe I can harness that power for our own purpose.
What do you mean? Doomhammer demanded. He knew better than to give Gul'dan free rein. No, he wanted specifics.
I can use these to create an altar, Gul'dan replied. An altar of storms. By channeling the energies from these stones, I can transform creatures. We will make them more powerful, more dangerous, though they may suffer some disfigurement.
I doubt any orc will let you experiment upon him a second time, Doomhammer pointed out sharply. He still remembered quite clearly the night Gul'dan had offered the so-called Cup of Unity, the chalice of rebirth, to every chieftain in the Horde, and to any warrior they deemed worthy. Doomhammer had not trusted the warlock even then, and when Blackhand had invited him to drink, he had refused, saying he did not wish to take away from his chieftain by sharing such power with him. But he had seen what the liquid had done to his friends and clanmates. It had made them larger and stronger, yes, but it also turned their eyes a glowing red, and their already greenish skin a vivid green, signs of demonic taint. And it had been driven them all mad with bloodlust, with rage, with hunger, and it turned the once noble orcs into animals, crazed killers. Some of the orcs had regretted their transformation later, but by then it was, of course, too late. Gul'dan smiled as if he knew what his war chief was thinking, and perhaps he did. Who knew what strange powers the warlock now possessed? But he only replied to Doomhammer's words, not the thoughts behind them.
I will not use orcs to test these altars,
Gul'dan assured him.
No, I'll use creatures that can benefit far from even more strength, but will barely notice any reduction in intellect.
Gul'dan grinned.
I will use an ogre.
Doomhammer considered that. They did not have many ogres, but the ones they did control were easily worth 10 times their weight in other soldiers. To make them even stronger, that would definitely be worth the risk.
All right, he said at last. You may build one of these altars. Let us see what happens. If it works, I will supply you with more ogres, or other race you wish.
Gul'dan bowed low, and Doomhammer nodded, his mind already onto other logics as he turned away. Chapter 12.
Faster, damn you! Move faster!
Olivia struck her thigh with one fist, as if the motion could somehow spur the troops into more speed. She paced them for a moment, then sped up, unable to move that slowly for long. Within minutes, she had passed the long line of men and caught up with the cavalry again. Automatically, she glanced around, searching for the short blonde hair near the front. There. You need to pick up the pace, she snapped, at Tyrolian as she slid between the other horses and moved alongside him. The young paladin started and flushed, but right now she could not take her normal pleasure in his reaction. There was no time for such foolishness. "We're moving as fast as we can," he told her calmly, though she noticed he glanced behind him to gauge the troops. She'd anyway. "You know our men cannot match you for speed, and armies always move more slowly than individuals." "Then I'll go on myself, as I should have from the start," she insisted, tensing to sprint past the horses and deeper into the forest. "No!" Something in his voice stopped her, and she cursed under her breath. Why couldn't she disobey him? He didn't have the same presence as Lothar, and she was cooperating with the Alliance army at her own volition, not from any orders. Yet when he did actually command her, she found herself unable to resist. Which didn't mean she couldn't argue. "Let me go," she insisted. "I need to warn them." Her heart twisted again at the thought of her sisters, her friends, her kin being caught unawares by the horde. "We will warn them," Tyrolian assured her, and she could hear the certainty in his voice. "And we will help them stand against the horde. But if you go by yourself, you will get caught and killed, and that will not do anyone any good." It sounded as if he meant to say something else, and she felt a sudden surge of joy in her chest, but had no time to wonder about it. "I am an elf and a ranger," she insisted hotly. "I can disappear into the trees. No one can find me." "Not even a forest troll?" She turned and glared at the wizard, who was riding on... Not even a forest troll. She turned and glared at the wizard, who was riding on Tyrolian's far side. "Because we know they're working with the horde," he continued, "and we know they're almost your equal in woodcraft." "Almost, perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm still better." "No one is denying that," Kagar agreed diplomatically, though she could see the grin lurking behind his calm. "But we do not know how many of them there are out there between us and your home, and 10 of them would more than make up for your superior skill." Illyria cursed again. He was right, of course. She knew that, but that didn't stop her from wanting to run full speed, not caring about potential obstacles. She had seen the horde, seen what it could do. She knew the dangers it possessed, and now it was heading for her home, and her people had no idea such a danger was approaching. Just get them moving," she snapped at Tyrolian and sprinted ahead, scouting the path. She half hoped she would come across a few trolls or orcs, but knew they were still far too ahead for her to see. The horde had significant lead on them right now, and if those human soldiers could not move beyond their current snail's pace, it would only increase. "She's worried," Tagar said quietly as they watched Alir disappear from view. "I know," Charlie replied. "I can't blame her. I'd be worried too if the horde was heading towards my home. I was when I thought they would march toward the capital city, and that's as close to a home as I've had in the past 10 years or more." He sighed. "Plus, she's only got half the Alliance army at her back, and only me to command it." "Stop selling yourself short," his friend warned. "You are a good commander and a noble paladin, one of the Silver Hand, the finest in Lordaeron. She's lucky to have you." Tyrolian smiled at his friend, grateful for the reassurance. He only wished he believed it. Oh, he knew he was decent enough in combat. He had sufficient training, and their first clash with the horde had proven he could translate that into real fighting skills. But a leader? Before this war, he had never had to lead anything, not even prayers. What did he know about leading anything? True, as a boy, he had been forward enough, often divisive the games he and his friends played, or commanding one of their mock armies when they played at war. But once he joined the priesthood, all that had changed. He had taken orders from the senior priests, and then after they had brought him into Foul, He followed the Archbishop's instructions. Upon joining the ranks of the first paladins in training, he had fallen under Uther's guidance, as had they all. Uther had a powerful personality that did not brook dispute. He was also the oldest of them, and the closest to the Archbishop. Turalian had been surprised Lothar had not chosen Uther as his lieutenant, though perhaps he felt the older paladin's faith might make it difficult for him to interact with less pious man. Turalian had been honored and shocked to be granted such rank, and kept wondering what he could have done to deserve it, if he did deserve it. Lothar seemed to think so, and the champion of Stormwind had enough experience and wisdom to know. He was an incredible warrior and an amazing leader. Some of the men followed automatically, the kind of man who demanded respect and obedience from everyone who met him. Already, Alliance warriors called him the Lion of Azeroth, from the sight of his shield flashing through the orc ranks in Hillsbrad. Turalian wondered if he had ever have even a portion of that presence. He also wondered if he'd ever have a fraction of Uther's piety, and of his faith or the powers that bestowed. Turalian believed in the holy light, of course. He had since he was a small child, and serving in the priesthood had brought him closer in that glorious presence. But he had never felt it directly. Not its full strength, just glimmers of its attention or the outpour of its effect on another. And after seeing the horde and facing them in battle, he found his faith weaker than ever. The holy light, after all, resides in every living being, in every heart and soul. It was everywhere. The energy that bound all sentient beings together as one. But the horde was a terrible monstrous. They did things no rational being could do, depraved horrible things. They were truly beyond redemption. And how could such creatures be part of the holy light? How could its brilliant illumination reside within such utter darkness? And if it did, what did that say about its strength, and its purity, and its love could be so overpowering? But if it did not, if the horde was not part of the holy light, then it was not universal as Turalian had been taught. And what did that mean about its presence and its strength? And about the relationship of every being to every other being? He didn't know. And that was the problem. His faith had been severely shaken. He had tried praying since meeting the horde, but had been empty words. His heart was not in it. And without that commitment, the words meant nothing, accomplished nothing. Turalian knew the other paladins could cast their blessings upon soldiers, could sense evil, could even heal grievous wounds, but with a touch. But he could not. He was not sure he had ever had such talents, and he certainly did not possess them now. He wondered if he ever would. "You've gone quiet again." Kagar leaned closer and nudged him with one hand. "Don't think too deeply or you'll fall right out of that saddle." His tone was friendly and only a little concerned, and Turalian did his best to smile at the weak joke. "I'm fine," he assured the old seeming mage. "Just wondering what to do next." "What do you mean?" Kagar glanced around, then looked back at the troops marching behind them. "You're doing fine. Keep the men moving, make the best time we can, and hope we catch the horde before they do too much damage." "I know," Turalian frowned. "I just wish there was some way we could pass them and reach Guelph the Lost first." "Perhaps Illyria's right. Maybe I should let her go on ahead. But if she gets caught, if anything happened to her..." He trailed off and glared at Kagar, who was now grinning openly. "What?" "Oh, nothing," his friend said, laughing. "But if you're this concerned about every soldier, we might as well give up now, because you won't be willing to send any of them into battle for fear they'll get hurt." Turalian swatted at the mage, who ducked the blow, still laughing, and they rode on, the army stretching out behind them. "Almost there," Turalian assured Illyria, who was pacing around his horse as if he was standing still. "I know that," she snapped, barely looking up. "This is my home, remember? I know the distance better than you could." Turalian sighed. It had been a long 2 weeks leading the army 2 weeks. Leading the army had been demanding, though he had already done much of the same work on previous marches. The difference was that before, Lothar had been responsible for the final decisions. This time, it was all up to Turalian, and that had been an added weight enough to make him lose sleep most nights. And then there had been Illyria. All the elves had been on edge the whole way, worrying what might be happening to Quel'Thalas. But the others had kept quiet, knowing voicing their concerns would only increase his stress and possibly slow them down further. Not Illyria. She had questioned every decision the whole way. Why they were taking one valley and not the other. Why they were lighting campfires instead of eating and sleeping cold. Why were they halting at twilight instead of marching on into the night. Turalian had been nervous enough about taking command, but Illyria's constant badgering had made him 10 times worse. It felt like he was under constant scrutiny, like every decision earned her full disapproval. "We'll reach the base of the foothills soon," he reminded her. Once we have, we should have, once we have, we should be able to see the borders of Quel'Thalas. Then we'll know how far the horde has gotten. Perhaps they were slowed going over the mountains and have not reached it yet." That had been one blessing, at least. Lothar had persuaded the Wildhammer dwarves to send one of their number down to Alterac. The dwarf had carried orders for Admiral Proudmoore, who had several ships stationed near Daramir Lake. Upon receiving the orders, Proudmoore had dispatched his ships down the river. They had met up with Turalian and the army just below Stormgrad, and ferried the soldiers on board. They had then sailed upriver past the mountains, instead of going over them as the horde had done. It had saved them considerable time. Turalian just hoped it would be enough. He would have preferred to sail straight to Quel'Thalas, but Illyria had assured him that would be impossible. Her kin would never allow human ships upon their portion of the river. They had been forced to disembark near Stratholme and proceed on foot once again. "Once I see the forest, I am going on ahead," Illyria warned. "Don't try and stop me." "I don't want to stop you," Turalian replied, pleased to see the monetary smile cross her face, followed by a surprised. "I want you and your rangers to find your brethren and warn them," he reminded her. "I just don't want you possibly running into the entire horde on the way. But we're close enough now that if the horde did get here first, we'll be able to distract them. That'll give you enough time to slip past and rally your kin. Then you can hit them from behind while we attack the front. And we'll catch the horde right between us." Illyria nodded. She glanced up at him, silent for once, and then laid a hand along his leg. To Turalian, it felt like the touch radiated the heat of a small sun, setting his blood on fire, his limbs tingling. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, unable to speak. One of her rangers broke the moment by dashing back toward them. "The end of the hills lies just ahead," he told them quietly. "I can see the trees beyond." Illyria glanced up at Turalian, who nodded, pleased that for once she was asking permission. She turned and raced away, the other ranger right beside her, but she did not get far. The two elves were still in sight when they stopped, as if struck, and stared. Then Illyria wailed. A sound full of such grief as Turalian had never heard. "By the light!" Kicking his steed into full gallop, Turalian raced to her side and then froze, tugging his horse to a stop as he too saw what had upset them so. The foothills had indeed ended, and the majestic forest of Quel'Thalas, home of the High Elves, spread out before them. Its tall trees swayed gently, almost as if dancing in silent music, and their heavy burrows cast deep shadows upon the land, shadows that somehow seemed peaceful rather than ominous. It was a beautiful scene, full of calm and quiet majesty, broken only by the thick cloud of gray smoke billowing up from several sprouts, including one along the front edge, but slightly west of their position. Squinting, Turalian could see dark figures swarming among the trees there, the great gaps in the leafy canopy alongside them. He could also make out great tongues of flames licking over thick objects in the empty spaces, and the smell of the green wood burning reached him, almost choking him. The horde had arrived first, after all, and they were burning Quel'Thalas. "We have to stop them!" Illyria cried. She spun back towards Roland. "We need to stop them!" "We will," he told her. He looked out a second time, making sure what he saw, then turned to Harold just behind him. "Inform the unit leaders," he announced. "We will ride north through the hills until we are level with the orcs, then we will charge, taking them unawares. Warn the men to gather water as best they can, and detail several units to put out those fires. We do not want the forest burning down around us." The herald nodded, saluted, and wheeled his horse about, riding back to convey the new orders. Trollian was already turning to Khadgar. "Can you do something to stop the fires?" he asked. His friend grinned. "Will the thunderstorm suffice?" "As long as the lightning does not find any more trees, yes." Trollian turned to Illyria. She did not respond, but still staring at the smoke, her face pale. "Illyria!" That snapped her around to face him. "Take your rangers and go. Go! Your brethren are no doubt already fighting the horde somewhere within the forest. Find and let them know we are here. We need to coordinate our attacks, or the horde will crush your people within the trees and then smother us without." She stared at him, nodding but still in shock. "Now!" he snapped, hating to speak to her so harshly, but knowing it was the only way. "Or are you too slow to make it to the trees safely?" That earned a sharp glare, as he hoped it would, and she snarled at him, but turned away. With a few quick words to the other elves, and a quick tug to adjust the bow slung across her back, she set off, moving fast as an arrow down the hill and toward the forest. The other rangers flanked her, and soon they had reached the cover of the trees and disappeared into the shadows. "May the holy light protect you," Trollian whispered, watching them go. "May the holy light protect us all," Khadgar said grimly. "We'll certainly need it."